So welcome to Best Practices for Delivering Your Online Course. My name is Tracy Miller, and my title is the Online Teaching Coordinator here at Northern Illinois University, and I specifically work in the Department of Faculty Development and Instructional Design Center, and I also teach a course for the College of Education. Our objectives for today's workshop is that you will discover some practical strategies on how to communicate with your students, grade your student work online, and some ways you can support your online students. This is the first sort of the introductory workshop on best practices for strategies. So I go through a lot of the strategies in a, I don't want to say a quick manner, but a brief manner, a generalized manner. We actually have workshops, individual workshops on any one of the topics that I'm going to cover today. So if there's something that you want to know a little bit more about, certainly ask me about it, but also, you know, again, try to attend those other workshops or view the recordings for some more details on any of the topics that we're going to cover today. So as an introduction to the workshop, this is what Quality Matters calls their online quality pie. And so the idea is there's a lot of things that go into having a great online course. And, you know, it could be anywhere from your course design to the learning management system that your institution uses, which is this LMS down here, to really how prepared are you and how your students are prepared to be in sort of this online environment. This particular workshop, we are going to be concentrating on course delivery. Are there some overlaps? You bet. There are definitely things that are in the planning of an online course that affects delivery. As you deliver a course, maybe the first or second time, it informs how you may want to change the design. But again, just to kind of focus, we're going to be talking about the best practices for delivering an online course. By the way, too, if you have any questions at any point, just put them in the text chat area, and I will kind of answer them right away, or sort of maybe have a natural pause somewhere that I can answer them. And I try to kind of pause in between sections too, in order to ask you if you have any questions. So I'm good about checking the text chat area, so it really shouldn't be too long until I can answer a question for you. So here's my big epiphany, and a lot of you said you were teaching blended or you were thinking about teaching online. The big secret is it's really not so different from teaching a face-to-face course. You're still going to need to communicate with your students. You're still going to have to assess their progress and grade their work, and of course you always want to be supporting their learning. So what is different about teaching online? What I would say is what is different is maybe the approach you take to how you sort of meet these goals. And so, you know, what is the approach? And one of the first things we always think about is how do we get to know each other? Because in an online environment, it can feel very isolating. It can feel very, distant. And so you really need to be intentional about getting to know your students in an online course. It's natural, it's instinctual in a face-to-face course. So here are some things to think about when you're getting to know your online students. So I've broken it into this table, and the first is the students' motivation, and also what faculty can do and kind of take the lead on in order to help their students. First of all, online students hey, and quite frankly, students in general are all about themselves and they have their own sort of priorities and interests. And especially online students, they may be working full-time, they might have family obligations. There's sort of a lot going on. And so what faculty can do is really be intentional about connecting the material in any course to something that the students may be interested in. So one of the things I would say in order to kind of take that lead is to try to share something personal but not intimate about yourself. It's one of the first best practices that help the students feel connected to you and help them feel like there's a real person behind the curtain, you might say. So share something, maybe it's that you love gardening, or you know, something about your children, or maybe even something that you experienced when you were a student, just to kind of build that connection for them. And then express interest in their lives. So anything that you kind of hear about with your students, whether it's a kind of a getting to know you early experience in the class, try to make those connections for them. So for instance, if you said you were interested in gardening and one of your students said that they work at a community garden or something, that's a shared interest you have. And so that can really help connect with your students. And again, it may be something that you would do in a face-to-face course. You would just have these before class conversations or something like that. And so you want to build them into what you're doing in an online course. Students are, of course, very motivated by their academic life. They want to know how they can impress you, how they can achieve your learning objectives. Adult learners especially, which can really make up for a lot of our online students. They want to know how they can do better and how this is going to affect them, because they're really trying to, again, balance a lot of things. So anything you can do to articulate your expectations, whether that's an initial conversation about how you like to run the course, or whether it's kind of embedded into a rubric or a course goal or something like that, let them know that relevance to them. And then finally, identify and reward what you value. So one of the things that I really value is that when students are interacting with each other in an online course, I really like when they're supportive of each other, but they're also pushing the envelope a little bit, and they're kind of challenging each other. So I try to really let my students know that, and it's also rewarded, quite frankly, with the point values. And then finally, students' future professional life. Why is this particular activity or anything important to something that's going to be in their career? You know, just making it real for them and understanding that this is not just something that we're going to do to sort of get an A in the course, but it's something that we're really helping them build their future with. Again, those adult learners, it's very important because they'd really like to know how they can incorporate some of their things into their career and their job, you know, the next day, the next week. So anything that you can do, but here's some tips here. Have a passion or enthusiasm for your discipline. So especially if it's part of a program, you know, if you're not showing that passion and enthusiasm, they're going to think that something's kind of a little off for it. Because you can't show that passion and enthusiasm maybe through your body language, you're going to need to maybe show it a different way. And maybe that's you're just, you have like a current events area or something like that, and you're letting them know what's going on in their field right now, and that excitement just shows through that kind of activity. If it's not something part of their program directly, try to connect it to some common skills that would be beneficial for them, whether it's presentation skills, better research skills, being able to articulate ideas in a different way. Let them know that you think this is not necessarily one of our learning objectives, but these are some skills that are going to work for you across your program, or maybe again in your professional life in some ways. I think about this when I talk to faculty about, they're nervous about having their live course through a tool like we're using this afternoon. And I always tell them that I think that's a real 21st century skill, to be able to present in sort of this webinar style. And so even though it seems a little artificial, that is a skill that our future workforce is going to need. And so, let them know that. Also acknowledge their current professional lives. So if there's any way that you can help them connect to what they're doing in their professional lives, just do that, and also acknowledge that they have other responsibilities going on right now. And it may add some flavor, some richness to the course, especially if somebody that can really connect their professional lives to what you're doing in the course, that's actually going to benefit all of the students. So another way that you can kind of connect and communicate some things with your students is to really create engagement in your course. And one of the things, because I said we're going to have some real practical strategies, is if there's any way that you can use a profile page. Now here at NIU and our version of Blackboard, we have an opportunity for students to create student profiles. And so again, if you're interested in that, let me know, but that is a global application. And if you're in your Blackboard course, at the top you will see and you can give directions to your students for this, but you can do this yourself too. You can click on this area and add your picture, add any of your other interests to the student profile, and it gives the students a quick snapshot of what each other's kind of into, whether it be a club or even, just, you can see in this case, this person has decided to take sort of a funny picture of themselves, so you sort of start to understand their personality in that way. I give my students 10 points for creating a student profile. It's not huge. They don't have to do it if they don't want to, but it definitely gives me some insight into the students too. Another way, or another best practice, I should say, is not only to communicate, but to communicate frequently. And that really depends on, the length of the course and some other things. If you are doing a blended course, you may not need to communicate as frequently. So that's sort of your own prerogative of how long you think communicate frequently means, but it could be anywhere to a weekly announcement, maybe a reminder like I have in this example, a reminder in maybe before a major project is due. Sometimes we feel like we're holding their hands a little bit when we're giving them these reminders. So it doesn't have to be a reminder. It's just kind of a check-in that, hey, I'm out here. Don't forget that, you should be involved in this course, and some sort of frequency. It could be a variety of things. It could be just a reminder that certain events are coming up in your discipline. I've done some things where I've talked about different athletic events coming up at NIU, because I think that even though an online student may not be able to come to campus, you still want to have them have that sense of spirit. And so, you know, they simulcast games now, and so you can be a Husky fan even in sort of a virtual environment. Folks like this, so I always kind of point this out. As far as reminders go, some of our tech savvy students like text reminders more than email. It's kind of in the world that they're in. So this is just a service that folks like I said, remind.com, and it allows you to send reminders and messages to your students. It comes in as a text message, but because you're going through this, it doesn't show them your personal phone number, so you don't have to worry about giving out your personal cell phone number to your students. They can also elect in or out of it, so if it's not something that they're generally interested in, you know, they don't want to be getting all these text messages, then they can opt out. So cool tool to check out, and again, kind of helps them, helps you kind of meet them where they're at, I guess. Okay, so the next thing I would suggest with kind of a communication best practice with your students is to respond, and I say here between 24 and 48 hours, and that's because people ask me, what's the best practice for responding to my students? So I will tell you that I would say it's between 24 and 48 hours. It really depends on what you're comfortable with, and again, that pace of the course. Faculty that I work with that are doing accelerated courses over the summer that are 4 to 8 weeks long, that almost needs to be accelerated, because for a class that basically every day accounts for a week during the semester, it would be really detrimental for the students to have to wait 24 hours to hear back from you. So again, it kind of depends on the course. The part that I'm going to tell you is the most important is that you communicate that to your students. And so what I do is, this is just sort of a sample My Instructor page that I do. And I tell them in my communication expectations that this is when I will reply to them. And so again, this is the important part, is that you let them know when you'll respond to it. Not only am I saying when, but I'm saying how. So I'm recommending first that they post their question in a discussion forum. Students often have the same type of question, and so they can all benefit from the answer. They can also answer each other. And so they might get a quicker response from a classmate. Say they're looking for a particular item in the course and somebody else will give them the answer to it. And again, letting them know that if it's something of a little bit more private nature that they don't want to necessarily share with the whole class, they can email you, and I'll say I'll try my best to respond within 24 hours. I give myself a little bit of a loop there just because, things come up, right? So I'm still going to try to reply to them as soon as possible. But it may be I'm at a conference or something like that, and I won't be able to respond to them immediately. So my next best practice is to use media. If you're comfortable with it, it does not have to be flashy and fancy and like completely professional, because again, I think it makes you more human when you're sort of more informal with these things. So what I have here, this is a screenshot, so a lot of times folks will try to click on it. It won't do anything. It's just a stagnant picture. But the reason I chose this one is because this is what I'll typically do, is create a welcome to the course. and I upload it to YouTube, and then I actually transcribe it. And so I've left the closed captioning on here to kind of show you what I say, but also to show you that using the closed captioning is important for the accessibility for your students with disability, but it could actually help all of your students, because if they're watching this, let's say on a train or something like that, they can actually participate, like I said, in a noisy environment and still be able to hear you, because that's what students are doing. They're accessing these courses anytime, anywhere is how we describe online courses in a lot of ways. So my next recommendation is to communicate with your students using the Retention Center. And I think it's gaining momentum, but here at NIU, the Retention Center is something that's happening in all of your courses, but not many people are aware of it yet. The Retention Center is found in the course management area under evaluation, and then it says the Retention Center. What pops up first is an at-risk table, and so it's looking for 4 different criteria that have been identified as monitoring at-risk behaviors. And so you can see them here. There's missed deadlines, a grade alert, an activity alert, and an access alert. I'm going to use the access alert as my example here, especially since it's the first week of courses here at NIU. If I notice that my students have not even accessed the course yet, or if they're not accessing it frequently, then I go ahead and I use this button at the top here, Notify, and it'll pop down a menu that'll allow me to notify the students. And it has a default message in it, default subject line. I usually change it to be a little more personal. You know, I'll say, I noticed you haven't accessed the course. You know, you really need to jump in there. Is there any way that I can help you? And again, you're being supportive, but you're communicating with your students through that too. Why did I put this in a communication area? What I like about this is that down at the bottom, there's this notification history. And so it keeps track of when I notified the students. So if this is something that I see is starting to become an issue, it's kind of tracking all of my correspondences with this particular student. And so I can kind of refer back to that. Yes, can I dig through my emails and figure out when I sent them, but it's kind of in a nice package in the Retention Center here. So that's what I like about using the Retention Center for that particular purpose. Just because I used the access alert as my example, I will let you know that you can change any of the criteria for these defaults. This particular one is set up as that they haven't accessed it in the last 5 days. You can change that to, you know, 10 days, 2 weeks if it's maybe a blended environment, or even shorten that window up to 1 or 2 days again if you've got that accelerated course. You can completely customize that. So that kind of concludes my strategies for communicating with your students. We're going to transition to strategies for grading, but I promised I would pause for a minute, maybe breathe a little bit in order to let you ask any questions. Again, you can ask them in the text chat area, and I'll be happy to answer them for you. So as folks may be typing in there, I'm just going to move on to these strategies for grading. And I certainly will leave time at the end for just general questions too. So my first strategy for delivering an online course as it relates to grading is to keep students and yourself on track? Oh, and here Benjamin has a question. Here's a general question about student-to-student interaction. Do you recommend mixing written discussion board assignments with video chat sessions or favoring one of the other? I would recommend mixing. Actually, most of the research on online programs will say that a blended environment is actually the best. Students do better than they do in completely online courses, and they do better than they do in face-to-face courses overall. And I want to make sure I clarify that, because there are good and bad courses in all of these mediums. But basically what that tells me is that any time that you can mix things up is a good idea. Some students will gravitate more towards one than the other, and so you're giving them that sort of choice and that option. Some students are they just come out of their shells with discussion board assignments. They can add video chats, they can add videos of themselves to discussion boards, so you can even blend it in there. But again, it's I would mix and match. One of the things here at NIU is if you do have any mandatory sessions like we're doing today where it's live, you need to let them know before the add drop time that you're going to require them to attend these sessions. Obviously, even better would be allowing them to know what those times were when they're originally registering for the course. So yeah, I'm always a big proponent of variety in any situation. So getting back to how you keep track of, help your students keep track of what they're doing and yourself, is to let them know what your expectations are, but also how they can access any feedback and grades that you give to them, and let them know that sort of turnaround window. And this last paragraph here, I said your grade and feedback will be posted within 3 days of the due date. That is my policy. Your policy may be different. Again, up to you. What I usually recommend is that you want to give them some sort of feedback in order to potentially improve their work before the next due date comes into play. So in my case, I have them do an initial discussion board post on Thursdays. Everything's due on Sunday. So I want to make sure that I get my grading done by Tuesday, just to, again, have them have a better quality of work for the next time. Anything that has to do with keeping your students on track and yourself may have some flexibility. It should be pretty consistent. It's nice to kind of have students be able to anticipate how things are going to be going from week to week. But if that's something that doesn't really work for you, or maybe even a particular week, I use the example of having to go to a conference or something, let your students know that, hey, grading's going to be a little delayed this week because I will be offsite at a conference. This is part of the communication a little bit, that you're helping them stay connected. I'm going to actually skip over this one because I think this next slide is more important, and it has to do with pacing yourself. So I said that my due dates are typically that first one on Thursday, and then most of the work actually is due on Sunday night, and then I have that 2.5 days of grading potentially. Pick something, if you can, pick something that's going to work for you. If you don't like grading over the weekend, let's say, then don't make your due dates on Friday and have your students kind of be checking them over the weekend. Or let them know, you know, nothing's happening over the weekend, so look for your grades to be posted on this day. space things out if you think there is going to be something that is going to take more time for you. So if you have a midterm paper or a big project and you know that that grading is going to take some more time, kind of look over that semester-long calendar and, you know, think about that so that you're not stressing yourself out. That's not going to do you any good. That's not going to do your students any good. So make sure, again, that you have yourself paced out a little bit. Change things up if you have a complete course schedule and you have several courses. Give your time. You know, you don't want to have 5 courses and you're doing all of your grades on Monday or Tuesday. Try to think of ways that you can help yourself, and that's going to be important to your students. So that's something that you need to think about ahead of time. So that's a little bit of a planning, but you'll definitely notice the difference when you're delivering that online course. So practical strategies to help you grade when you've got a lot of grading to do. My first one is to grade using the Blackboard interactive rubrics. Rubrics are something that can be a lot of work up front, but then they save you so much time in the long run when you're doing the actual grading. And then once you get a really good rubric, you can go ahead and copy and paste it from semester to semester. And I promise you that good work up front is going to save you some time in the long run. But it's also really good for your students because the rubric will show them up front what your expectations are for the course, help them meet those expectations. So here's my tip on the grading. The way the Blackboard interactive rubrics work is that you are simply clicking on buttons that's going to give them that quick feedback, and it's going to reinforce your expectation, but it also allows you to add some feedback in the bottom, which you can be more personalized or more specific about. And in this particular example that I have here, the students actually exceeded their expectation, my expectation, and I always try to focus my energy on feedback that's maybe more formative or is going to help them improve their next iteration of the work. So if I'm really crunched for time, I may only check off a box and again put more time into that feedback where the students need it. But here's another way that you can provide feedback really quick and easy. And this is to create a bank or of common feedback phrases. I have an entire workshop on delivering great feedback to your students that'll actually be next month. So I actually go over this table in a lot more detail in that one. But the idea here in a very general way is just keep a couple different feedback banks, something that's positive, so that's that great work that you still want to kind of acknowledge, and then here's the constructive feedback. Obviously you're going to kind of tweak it, but you know, this at least gives you a place to start with. I think this bank kind of builds up over time. If you sort of are teaching the same course multiple times, you kind of know what you're going to give to your students as feedback, and so you can kind of just build this bank. First couple times you use it, you know, you kind of have to condition yourself to, okay, I'm doing some grading, so let's make sure I open up that feedback bank and do some copying pasting in there, because we can definitely get caught up with that. But again, just like the rubrics, I think in the long run it can save you some time. So I've given you some advice on some best practices on grading your students and giving your student feedback, because I think grades can be a feedback, but I think that the feedback is really important, because we have to think about it a little bit more in an online course, just because we're not necessarily just naturally having a conversation with them like we would in a face-to-face course. So again, I'm going to take a deep breath to allow you to ask questions in the text chat area, or even share comments. I'd love to hear some of your best practices for what you might have done in maybe a blended course, maybe in an online course, possibly even something that you experienced as a student that you felt really helped you. Well, I've taken a sip of water and a deep breath, so I will move on, but do not be afraid to put some questions or comments into the text chat area. So this next section is all about how, Joyce, you have a question. Would you like to use your microphone, or would you rather just put it in the text chat? All right, text away. I think your colleagues are saying to add it to the text. Go ahead and add it if you'd like, but I'm just going to kind of keep rolling along here because I'm looking at the clock and I want to make sure I cover things. So what do I mean by supporting our students and their success? One of the best practices I would suggest is maybe a pre-survey. Oh, and my timing is always impeccable that way. I always get the questions right after I start again. How to deliver questions and interact with my professor online in Blackboard. There's a couple ways you can deliver questions and interact with your professor in Blackboard as a student. So if your professor does not have a discussion forum already kind of added to Blackboard, you really will have to use either the Blackboard email function or quite frankly just use the email, because unless they've kind of set up that environment for you, then it's harder to ask questions. The one other option I would say for that is that if you have submissions, an electronic submission, an assignment that your professors created in Blackboard, there is a text area that often that's where you put your work, but you can also put some comments in there for them. So, you can say, I hope this is okay because I was a little bit unclear about it. And so this is kind of how I approach the assignment. But again, depending on how many times you can submit the assignment, I would recommend an email at this point. Will Blackboard Ultra replace current Blackboard on NIU? Thinking you're talking about Blackboard Learn Ultra. We're currently on Blackboard Collaborate Ultra in this session that we're having. Blackboard Ultra is out there right now. Here at the university, we don't jump in quickly to things that hasn't been tested by the industry and hasn't been tested by us. In particular, Blackboard Ultra, Blackboard Learn Ultra is hosted differently than we normally do, which means that Blackboard itself hosts it instead of the university. And also it looks completely different. So if we decided to go with Blackboard Ultra, a lot of our training and our support and our tutorials and all that would have to be completely redone. So that would really play into whether we decided to use that. So there's nothing coming up, I can tell you, probably in the next year and a half at least, that we would be switching to Ultra. Now, as far as Blackboard Collaborate, which is the kind of the web conferencing service that we're using here, we have switched over to that Ultra, and we do have an instance of sort of the more traditional legacy one, but we switched over to Ultra because it really works. We're happy with it. Catherine said, could the other students see the questions and answers as well? The other students could not see your questions and answers unless you used, again, a set up discussion board, or if you emailed all of the students. So if you used Blackboard email and you selected the one that went to all of the students, then they would see it. And it would be up to the professor to whether they replied to everybody. Okay, questions are popping up like crazy now. How can you improve the skills of SS and BB? You're going to need to tell me what SS is. I'm going with student support, but I'm not sure. Joyce said, in the retention center, what is the difference between access and activity? So access is straight up access. When the last time they came into the course. Activity is actually a combination of access, but also are they frequently submitting assignments, participating in the discussion areas, and so it's more of a collection of things. And honestly, activity depends on how much activity you've built into the course. So it's definitely sort of the grayest of those criteria, but that is the difference. Okay, so how can you improve the skills of students in Blackboard? So how you improve the skills in using Blackboard is you can give them some tutorials, and I can kind of talk a little bit at this next section that I'm talking about right now has some ideas on that, but Blackboard itself actually has a lot of tutorials for students. So let's say that you wanted to sort of train your students on how to use the discussion board. You could just create a link in the course to that tutorial that Blackboard has already created for you. There's also just the idea that if you are doing anything, let's say you're going to have them take an online test, have them take a low stakes or a no point test first to sort of help them get used to that technology without any of the consequences of declining their grade, because not because they don't know the content, but because they're just sort of uncomfortable with the technology. Those practice activities are a good one, and providing them with those tutorials. Also, let them know what kind of support they can get. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this next section. So I definitely want to get to it. The pre-survey that we were just talking about, that we just kind of briefly mentioned, could be a survey on how comfortable they are with using certain skills. So you could ask them if they ever took an online course before, or if they've ever participated in an online discussion. You know, in some cases, they are on social media every day and they are very comfortable with online discussions, maybe too comfortable with online discussions, so that you know what sort of support they may need based off of how they respond to the survey. The second one, and you know, we talked about whether you know, you should have a discussion board or a live session. Have a virtual office hour. You can use Collaborate, just like I used this afternoon. It's in your courses. And just don't have a lot of content planned. Maybe it's just all about answering those questions and finding out what they're nervous about, and just kind of being available to help them through that. I did a virtual office hour last night for my course. I make it optional. I only had 2 out of 30 students there. I did record it and make it available to all my students. The ones asking the recording wouldn't necessarily get to ask those kind of individual questions that they wanted to ask, but it not only helps you connect with your students, but it also helps them feel like, you know, you're thinking about them and you want to support them. The other option that I think Catherine maybe wishes her professor had done was given them a place to be able to ask questions. And so that is definitely, I mean, that example right there just shows you that this is a good thing to do for your students. Give them a place that they can just simply ask questions. And I call this one an FAQ or a Q&A discussion. I've seen it called a help forum, you know. The reason I called this one the FAQ, the frequently asked question forum, is because anything that I see in my question and answer discussion in one semester, I want to make sure I address it in the next semester already built in the course, because if they're asking these questions, that's maybe my clue that things need to be a little bit more clear for them. So I have the screen up here, which is like, hey, am I asking for more questions? I'll always take questions, but the idea is that you give a place to your students for them to be able to ask these questions. Quite frankly, it's good for blended and face-to-face questions too, because this may be that question that happens after class is over, and I think we've all said it at the end of a face-to-face course where, does anybody have any questions on this? And then you know, you're kind of boggled at the time, but then that question comes an hour later. So I think it's good for anything. You're welcome, Mohammed. I'm glad that helped you out. I've also seen this used for face-to-face courses when there's something you want to share out with your students. Perhaps there was a horrible ice storm and you missed class. You don't want to get too behind, so you can use a discussion board to kind of keep that conversation flowing. Benjamin, what's a good place to do so? An open discussion board with posts for responding to others. So there's a couple things in here that I see. A good place to have a general discussion. So sort of I have this general question about when the quiz is due. You know, you can put it in maybe more of a course information, a general area. They'll all show up in the discussion board, which is kind of the house that holds all the discussions. For an open discussion with points for responding to each other, those are more content specific, where you might have a prompt that's been formulated that you want the students to kind of respond to. I put links to those discussions directly into the module where they'll find them. A module or a unit or a week is just the way that a course is kind of chunked up. So for instance, because it's week 1, you know, I do have sort of a more informal discussion, but next week I have a really content specific discussion. So I've put a link to the discussion in that module area. And I give points. I have a rubric for not only a great, rich initial post, but also how they respond to others. And that's so they don't respond to each other with a simple, great job, you know, kind of thing. I want them to really try to enrich that conversation. So next, if your students are struggling with something, You can use a discussion board, but I like to have this area for sort of this muddiest point idea. And maybe it's not completely covered in mud like these boots are, but you want to give them the opportunity to just kind of come clean, listen. I'm a little bit unsure about this particular area, almost like a safe environment to ask questions. This could be its own muddiest point discussion board. One of the ways I really like to do this is using a reflection journal. And so just having the students kind of think at the end of every week, at the end of every unit, whenever you think might be a good touch point, to just say, go ahead, check in with me. What's kind of been unclear for you? You kind of making that window for your students to be able to kind of share this concern with you. I thought I saw a hand raise, so if you have a question, you could go ahead and add that to the text chat area. I'd love to hear it. Okay, so we touched on this a little bit of how do I help my students have some better skills in Blackboard. And I talked about using tutorials with your students, giving them that. Any support that you can give your students from other units that really understand that will kind of allow you to concentrate on your teaching and not have to worry about some of these other elements. So I'm going to be sending out a series of links. These are NIU links. So what I would encourage our other folks to do is to find similar support places in their university. The first one is it's called the help desk, or now we even call it the service desk at NIU. And make sure you provide your students with that. So if they do have any technical questions about Blackboard, they will contact the service desk, which is open 365, 24/7. It's open all the time. Students get a hold of this service desk, and that way, hopefully, they're not stressing about it, and they're not worried because you're not responding to them in the middle of the night when they're trying to submit something. They are contacting the folks that can help them out. The second link I'm sending out is actually to NIU's Disability Resource Center. If you have any concerns about your students, whether it be a physical disability or maybe more of a student with an invisible disability, let your students know that the Disability Resource Center is there for them. And that way you can meet the needs of the most amount of your students. So I definitely like to add that one to my courses. There are a lot of different good resources that will help their students with their academic life in general. So let them know that there are support units for them for there. So I added a link to that. Catherine said, for experienced professors, it's easy to find out Muddiest Point in the process of an online course. But for a new teacher, how to find the Muddiest Point during an online course? Well, yeah, good question. I would say straight up ask them what they're having difficulty. I think, like you said, an experienced professor might have more of an intuition maybe about what's becoming unclear. I would also look at the quality of their work. That'll give you an indicator of where they're just sort of missing the boat. Really start to look at how they're, what's happening in the quality of their work to help you understand. Now, this is one of the advantages of an online course because you can go back to a discussion board and really dive in there and see how maybe some misconceptions are arising. Is there something that someone responded to that just kind of really missed the mark? And so you can kind of go back and kind of dig into those a little bit more. One of the things in the kind of the support window that I always like to share is our writing center here has virtual hours. So if a student is online and really is remote and does not come to campus, and you can see where they might need some help with their writing skills, the Writing Center does have that sort of virtual hour. And then because we're literally in the last minute of our hour together and I want to make sure that I respect everybody's time, Career Services is also a good support unit that will help your students, and you can definitely refer your students to them. This last slide here is just some best practices that sort of didn't fit in naturally in a lot of ways, so I want to make sure I cover them. If you haven't used it already, use the student preview mode. It's sort of this eye that's at the top of the screen that allow you to see things as students see them. Just can kind of help you with you know, their perspective. Reverse order your structure so that the students see sort of the most current work at the top. They're not scrolling down as the weeks unfold. Use your availability restrictions. They're in almost any of the different tools and features. That'll save you some time, but also remember to use your due dates. Due dates go on the calendar. The students can kind of see what's coming up and kind of plan out their schedule. It helps you monitor whether things are late or not. Maybe there, you know, you have a policy that you know, late points are deducted or something like that. So use your due dates. If you are grading discussion forums, make sure you enable grading. It's a button that you click off and you add the points to it. You can grade discussions, but it just makes that grading process easier. And then finally, model the behaviors you want. So whether that be the sort of the language you use or how often you're communicating, how formal or informal you are with your persona, model what you expect from your students and you'll have better results. Kevin says, what's the benefit of enabling grading in the discussion forums? First of all, you can put, you can attach a rubric to it, and just the way it kind of sets it up is easier. So if you don't enable grading, you don't see anything that says this thing needs to be graded. And so you would just kind of go through the discussion threads and maybe make some notes and add things to the that column in the grade center, where if you enable grading, you're going to get that prompt that says something needs grading. When you click on it to grade it, it's sort of like a beautiful thing where you see the initial posts and then you see that person's responses below it, but that's all it shows you. So if I had students do an initial post and replied to 2 others, I'm not hunting and through all of the threads to find that. I'm seeing this just sort of neat little package. So definitely has its benefits. You know, I can't think of a time you wouldn't want to do that, except for if it was, you know, like a general information discussion and you didn't plan on grading it at all. Okay, good. So what did we talk about? These are kind of the big points. Goes back to my objectives for the workshop, but communicate with your students often. Okay, if you do anything else, you know, make sure you're checking in with them frequently. Grade your students' work. Use the tools that are available to you. Support your online students. Use the resources that are available to you, whether it's using those Blackboard tutorials or tapping into some of those other resource units. And then manage your workload. again, we have another workshop just on managing your workload. But remember to take care of yourself so that you can take care of your students. I always think of the spiel they do with the airlines, with the, you know, you put your oxygen mask on first before you put it on your child. So those are my best practices for you. And the last thing that I would like to do is I would like to give you the link to our workshop survey. And if you've got a couple minutes right now, that would be great. I'd love to get your feedback. I will include that link in my follow-up email too. I always appreciate your time this afternoon and your feedback so that the workshops can become more meaningful for you. So I will hang out for some questions, but other than that, thanks and have a great afternoon. Have a great weekend.